So today I wanted to talk about an album that represents an intriguing diversion from someone who normally makes music that would be a little outside the realm of this channel, which is Suzanne Vega's Days of Open Hand. You know, Vega's usually seen as a forerunner of coffeehouse female singer-songwriters like Tracy Chapman or Edie Brickell. But Days of Open Hand is a surprisingly experimental work that brings her closer to artists like Kate Bush or David Sylvian. And it's unfortunate that it seems to be a somewhat overlooked and unloved entry in her catalog. Now, Days of Open Hand doesn't sound like a progressive rock album in the classic sense or the standard sense, but it does suggest the spirit of progressive music in a couple of different ways. First, in its incorporation of experimental electronics and techniques from film scores and modern classical that suggests an urge to expand beyond the standard styles and forms of folk music or pop rock. In particular, some of what she does here with Fairlight synthesizers evokes what Kate Bush had been doing a few years earlier, for instance. Or she's also working with the composer Anton Sanko, who's done a lot of film scoring. And his use of sounds, the way that they weave into textures, reminds me almost in some places of Ryuichi Sakamoto, particularly his work with Sylvian. And also, while it's not a concept album in the traditional sense, Days of Open Hand has a unity of image and theme that's different from the artists that Vega's usually compared to. It has surreal, unsettling imagery that recurs across multiple songs so that the whole album builds to a more resonant statement through those connections than any one song could make on its own. The opening track, Tired of Sleeping, establishes several key themes. In particular, the procession of dream imagery in the lyric suggests the surrealism that will define much of the rest of the album, and the ways in which recurring images will pop up through the album in almost the manner that they do in a dream that stretches out over time, right? And the inability to wake up, to emerge from the dream of the lyric, suggests a sense of being almost stifled by a kind of mystical force, something not quite understood. There's a lot of fascinating writing in this track, but this line is my favorite.
Oh, Mom, the bird on the string is hanging. Her bones are twisting and dancing. She's fighting for her small life.
Beyond being evocative just on its own, that image, the bird fighting for her small life, that's something that will return later in a transformed way. So hold on to that. That sense of almost abstracted suppression, right, of the inability to wake, the lack of control of the self, comes back later in the song Rusted Pipe, one of the most effective on the album. The lyrical imagery here is of kind of the nightmare of the breakdown of one's language, or recovering from the nightmare of the breakdown of one's language, of trying to speak and making only meaningless sounds. The sonic texture here has a kind of rhythmic spryness that isn't so far from reggae in some ways, but the ominous organ chords, the guitar effects, the searching vocal melody, those things take that rhythmic quality, and instead of making it happy, they turn it into something tense and unsettled.
Now the time has come to move. I was not able. Water through a rusted pipe.
The track Institution Green is another key piece here, both musically and thematically, with its portrait of a kind of vaguely defined institution that exists somewhere between a hospital and a prison and a labor camp, where the greatest terror is having one's name found inside a book. The sinister version here of medical imagery, right, the sense of exploitation, those are the purest version of ideas that have flitted in and out of the margins of other songs. And musically, this track combines unconventional percussion, intricate layers of keyboard and guitar and strings, in a texture that manages to be both hypnotic and eerie.
What's needed then?
Speaking of those instrumental textures, the song Big Space is one of the places where synthesizer is used most evocatively. There's a big keyboard hook on what I believe is a Fairlight. I made the comparison earlier to Kate Bush. This sounds almost like the way that she would use synthesizers on Never Forever, or like something from Peter Gabriel's Security.
Between the pen and the paperwork, I know there's passion in the language. Between the muscle and the brain, there must be feeling in the pipe.
The closing track on the album, Pilgrimage, is maybe the most sonically experimental, with an interlocking weave of keys and percussion that reminds me a little bit of a simplified version of a minimalist composer like Steve Reich or Terry Riley.
This land is burning, turning to ash as it hits the air. Every line is a place on a map. It's a city or...
I don't know if that's actually a polymeter in the way that Reich would use, but either way, it's a fascinatingly complicated texture and just kind of a great thing to live in, right? It has the kind of imaginatively visual space of great soundtrack music or prog rock. But speaking of minimalist classical, Philip Glass makes an appearance on the track 50-50 Chance, which, despite being relatively short and stark, has always felt to me like the true dark heart of the album. Over a bed of pulsing strings arranged by Glass, Vega narrates from the perspective of a mother whose daughter is in a coma in the cardiac ward of a hospital following a suicide attempt. When I was talking earlier about the song Tired of Sleeping, I mentioned the perpetually sleeping narrator dreaming the image of a bird on a string twisting and dancing as it fights for its small life. I can't help associating that here with lines like the following.
Her little heart, it beats so fast. Her body trembles with the effort to last.
And in fact, my sense has always been that these songs are explicitly connected, that the narrator in Tired of Sleeping, telling her mother she wants to wake up, is the comatose daughter in 50-50 Chance. That, although I suppose that might be an overly literal way of understanding what's really just another instance of the phenomenon I've been praising throughout, of recurring images which play off each other in ways which become richer than mere narrative. Either way, I think the two songs represent an inversion of each other's perspectives, and they do quite a lot to enhance each other's emotional impact. You know, the one makes the other darker and richer and more vivid. Now, the point of this has not been to do a track-by-track review. If you're familiar with the album, you might be surprised that I haven't mentioned singles like Book of Dreams or Men in a War, which are the songs you'd be most likely to know if you've never heard the whole album. And that's honestly because, while I like those songs, I actually find them less sonically interesting and conceptually important than the ones that I've been discussing. But every track on this album is interesting in its way. Every track is important to its overall vision, and if you're somebody who's a fan of prog-influenced singers like Peter Gabriel, Kate Bush, David Sylvian, this is something that I was really surprised to discover, I think sits pretty neatly within that tradition and has its own eerie, unsettling vision. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to everyone in a week.